Hey there, and welcome to this week's edition of CleanTechnica's News Broadcast, the news show where we bring you all the relevant CleanTech news in approximately 20 minutes, though this one might actually be a bit closer to 30. My name is Hanan, I'm your host, and this week there is a bunch of news out there, not just EV news like last week. We have a lot of interesting climate change news, there are some pretty interesting carbon capture stories, some pretty interesting climate change laws in Denmark, also of course EV news, Tesla news, and a new segment we call Lightspeed Stories. So let's get to it. Volvo Blockchain. So this is pretty interesting. Volvo has invested in a company called Circular that will allow it to use blockchain technology to track the cobalt that will eventually be used in their batteries for their upcoming XC40 Recharge P8 EV. So a small refresher on what blockchain is. It's pretty similar to cryptocurrency, where all the computers in a network record a transaction that becomes part of an encrypted ledger that everyone has a copy of. So when one of the computers is hacked and suddenly claims it's rich, the rest will know it's not true and just shut it out of the system. Now, blockchain, it works on the exact same principle, but instead of just counting money, it counts absolutely everything. A very common example that is often used is a diamond ring. Say you're standing in a store trying to buy this diamond ring. Thanks to this 100% authentic, unalterable ledger, you know exactly where this diamond and the gold came from, which mine, which country, you know where the materials were processed, you know where the diamond was cut, and you know every single step that this ring took in order to get to that specific store where you're currently standing. And now that you have bought the ring, you have become the next link in the chain, the blockchain. And so if you ever try to sell this ring, the fact that you once owned it is basically set in stone. In theory, this can prevent fraud because trust is built into the system. This can prevent child labor in mines. This can enable a fully automatic, perfect bookkeeping system. It can allow for some anonymity, although that depends by system and is also a bit of can be a problem with the blockchain and cryptocurrencies. But in general, getting back to Volkswagen and their current press release, because what they said is that Circular's blockchain technology is today used throughout Volvo's cars' battery supply chain, which will achieve 100% traceability of cobalt used in the XC40 Recharge P8. In addition to that, they say they might also track mica, a mineral used in the isolation material for their battery pack. And then they also look to expand the system to other areas like CO2 footprint. So let me give you one more quote and then we can get to the real problem at hand. Volvo Cars was the first car maker to implement global traceability of cobalt used in its batteries by applying blockchain technology across its supply chain. The technology developed by Circular is implemented in partnership with CATL and LG Chem, Volvo Cars' battery supply partners. So in a world where we can't even seem to ensure that mines or sweatshops in India don't employ child labor, Volvo now wants to implement this grand new breakthrough of a technology and force everyone to use it, everyone including the mines, all the different mines in Congo, all the refineries, God knows where in the world, all of the battery makers they're partnered with, all companies that probably also have other clients to think about. Now, just imagine that you are in Congo and you are the owner of one of these mines. You now get to hear from your client, the refinery, that their client, the battery maker, is now required by their client, this specific automaker, to use this system and make everyone use it because some of this product that you might be shipping to us might end up in their batteries. Hope you got the message, because now the refinery needs to go to their shipping partners and explain the exact same story. Now, when it comes to Bitcoin, it is a ledger-based cryptocurrency and end product. But blockchain is more of an idea, not a product. So what exactly does Volvo plan to track here? Well, according to an earlier press release from November 2019, data the blockchain include cobalt's origin, attributes such as weight and size, the chain of custody, and information establishing that participants' behavior is consistent with OECD supply chain guidelines. The whole idea is incredibly complex, and this sounds more like something that should be implemented on a global, international level, something done by governments cooperating, or at the very least done by some kind of gigantic Silicon Valley conglomerate. Is the end user that buys a car from Volvo going to be able to see anything from this ledger? If so, then what part? I mean, it would be incredibly cool that if you buy a car that you can see where every component came from, where all the materials came from, to see how sustainable it all is. But really, I know this is coming anytime soon. And the main reason for this is that if these encrypted ledger-based technologies like cryptocurrency continue to grow as they have, they will, in just a couple of decades, use more electricity than the entire world needs for all the other reasons. Currently, Bitcoin on its own already uses more electricity than Switzerland. It uses 4 times more electricity than Google. I mean, this is just not sustainable. And all these transactions are going to start getting slower and slower to process. Now, there are, of course, solutions in the work to try to solve some of the power issues. But really, they're really pretty far away from practical application and widespread implementation. Tesla is also trialing blockchain for logistics in Shanghai. But that situation is very different. It is there to ensure during one specific step that all the paperwork is there, that it cannot be wrong, missing, falsified, and won't lead to any production delays. When Tesla tries to pick up a shipping container from the harbor, a specific concrete agreement between 2 parties, that is very doable. Carbon capture using rock dust. One of the biggest issues with tackling climate change is that there's just so much to do. We don't just need to switch all of our electricity production from fossil fuels to wind and solar. We also need to tackle the entire transportation industry, production like metallurgy, cement making. We need to tackle the agricultural industry, all the farming of rice fields and cows. And that is also not to mention all of the methane and CO2 already in the atmosphere that actually needs to be taken out of there. And also, we need to actually prepare for climate change, for all of the effects like sea rise, climate migration, climate destabilization, and all the chaos that will ensue from that. Really, what we truly need is really creative ideas. And if they are really creative, out-of-the-box ideas, they might not even cost much, or can actually help us make a profit in the process. And one such idea was in the news this week. It turns out that spreading rock dust on farmland could be a great way to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. Though I feel the need to point out the potential inaccuracy of that claim. We all know that trees are a carbon sink. Soil is also a carbon sink, but soil is also CO2 net positive because all of the emissions of the microbes and the decomposition outweigh what is being absorbed. It's part of the natural CO2 emissions the world would have even without us humans causing more pollution. But it's a sustainable amount. The CO2 deep in the ground after millions of years and various processes has turned into combustible fossil fuels that we decided to dig out of there and use to power civilization. That is the problem here, the total CO2 output that isn't sustainable. And so what this solution proposes is to infuse soil with basalt, often considered a volcanic rock, which silicate is the main ingredient of. The idea is to cover farmland with this rock dust because CO2 naturally binds to it, and basically this would reduce the amount of CO2 naturally emitted by soil respiration. Though by how much and whether it could even turn soil respiration into a CO2 net negative was not specified. The approach is called enhanced rock weathering, and it's actually going to be pretty straightforward to implement because a lot of farms already use limestone dust, a different type of rock dust, to increase the pH of the farmland to make it less acidic. And they actually use also a couple of other different rock dusts to increase how well the farmland works and how well the crops grow. So really, what is one extra rock dust here? Really, it's not that big of a deal. And another big advantage is that limestone is already a byproduct of mining, iron and steel manufacturing, cement demolition, stuff that is now either recycled, stockpiled, or ends up in landfills. All we need to do is stockpile it and encourage farmers to put it on their farms. And coincidentally, the 3 countries that had the most benefit from this, which is the US, China, and India, because of warmer temperatures, are also the ones that pollute the most. So that actually works out pretty well. And from those 3 countries, if they cover just half of their farmland this way, they will save as much as 2 billion tons of CO2 per year from reaching the atmosphere, which is basically the equivalent of how much India pollutes, or basically if you add Germany and Japan together. Now, this is basically 1/18 or 5.6 of all total global emissions per year. And that is quite a lot. And so, and keep in mind, this is carbon capture technology, basically. Well, it's not technology, but it is a way of capturing carbon. And so I'm wondering, why did this study only mention covering half of their farmland and not all of their farmland, and for example, also using it in other countries for where it would be less effective because it's less warm. And I'm wondering whether that has anything to do with how much these countries can produce this as a economically feasible byproduct. And maybe if you exceed those, the amount, then it would be not as economically feasible. A bit of a question remains there. But if that is not a limitation, then technically if they cover all their land farm, we could literally save 10% of all global emissions. And that is a hell of a lot. And another important question remaining then is whether this will be more effective and cheaper than man-made carbon capture technology. Project Vesta. The next story is connected to the previous because farmland isn't the only place that we can make use of silicate to capture carbon from. Project Vesta wants to make use of a mineral called olivine, a magnesium iron silicate, to capture CO2. It would come in the form of sand and would be deposited on beaches. This is actual footage of their trial, a slightly more greenish sand. As you might recall, ocean acidification is another climate change problem, but one that olivine might also be able to help with at the same time as capturing CO2, because olivine too raises the pH level, and in this case of the ocean. Now, when Project Vesta originally broke the news more than a month ago, it didn't make the news show because, it lacked specifics, it lacked numbers, but, considering this week's news story, it was a worthy addition to the overall picture. Greenwashing. This was originally a news story from Euronews where they discuss what is greenwashing, and it's actually a really, really interesting topic. Basically, it's when any company does any kind of action that has any other motives than just becoming more sustainable. Just like when Amazon is asking you to contribute to your favorite charity when you buy something, which is just so that Amazon will have to pay less in taxes because they donate that money in the eyes of the government. With greenwashing, the ulterior motive can be something as simple as a marketing ploy or something more complex where the company actually ends up saving money by doing something sustainable. The important part and the point of the story, however, is that there are two kinds of greenwashing. The first, like I said, is greedy companies with poor sustainability records doing some green stuff for PR or actually to save money. But the other is a lot more insidious. It's where companies don't actually do anything green or sustainable, but still claim that they do. Basically, the issue is pretty similar to the multi-century long issue of false advertising, where in the past companies could claim that their product helps or without actually needing to help, then help doesn't need to be specified, or that it's natural, even though most elements on the periodic table are found in nature. These are issues that have slowly been dealt with through regulation of advertising. But when it comes to greenwashing or claiming that this product is sustainable, that hasn't happened yet. Mostly because there is no proper definition for words like sustainable. And so until governments actually take action on this, which they really should, until then, greenwashing is legal. And that is a pretty big problem that a lot more people need to be aware of. Audi Q4 Vehicles. This week, Audi has been making a ton of fuss about their new Q4 and Q4 Sportback e-trons. These will be the first vehicles that Audi will make that are based on parent company Volkswagen's MEB platform, although it does come with a twist of their own. They say the battery capacity is 82 kilowatt hour, just like the top-of-the-line ID.3. Okay. Then they say the crossover accelerates in 6.3 seconds, where the top-of-the-line ID.3, a much smaller and lighter car, takes 7 seconds. Now, Audi has advertised that the vehicle is very aerodynamic, but that cannot account for the difference. What does is the fact that they will be using two motors with a total output of 225 kilowatt, where the ID.3 has an output of 150 kilowatt. And it is not available as a dual motor variant, only rear-wheel drive, the ID.3 I mean. And then the Skoda Enyaq that we covered recently, their top-of-the-line version, by the way, this vehicle is also based on the MEB platform, their top-of-the-line version also has dual motors that up to, again, 225 kilowatt. and it accelerates in 6.2 seconds and will be about 10,000 euros cheaper as well. Škoda promises a range of 460 kilometers for the all-wheel drive, though their rear-wheel drive version, by the way, gets 500 kilometers of range. But Audi, who also uses the all-wheel drive, promises 450 kilometers of range for this crossover, which is, considering that it's a lot bigger than the ID.4 and the Enyaq, is quite impressive if it's true. An Audi is more luxurious than a Škoda. A crossover is more expensive than a smaller vehicle, so maybe that is worth 10,000 euros, but really the MEB platform makes the most sense for cheaper vehicles, so that more people can now buy an EV at a non-Tesla price. According to some pretty realistic price estimates, the price is somewhere between the Q5 and the Q7 and a ton cheaper than the current lowest price e-tron. It is a mere 4,000 euros cheaper than the Model Y long range, and the Q4 e-tron Sportback is only 1,000 euros cheaper than the Model Y. And in the case of Tesla, you don't need to add thousands upon thousands of extra different kinds of options, things that really should be coming standard. Audi could surprise us, but it's highly doubtful. Though, one thing worth noting, this isn't the first time that we are actually seeing something about the Q4 e-tron concept. This video was already available for a while here, and we can see just how much the concept changed now that it has been rendered using ultra-realistic simulations. I'm constantly surprised how much they lately choose for those instead of actual vehicle footage, though you will hear more about that a bit later. Audi A7 PHEV. That is not the only Audi news this week, because they also announced an electrified A7, meaning that it's a PHEV with 25 miles of range, which is approximately 40 kilometers, which costs $5,700 more than the base model, bringing the total price to $74,900. Though technically speaking, the internal combustion edition of the Premium Plus package only costs $550 less than the hybrid version. And if you feel like getting the extra expensive leather and seat massage functions, you can always go overboard with their Prestige edition that costs around $4,000 to $5,000 more. Seat CUPRA Elborn. The Audi Q4 e-tron models are not the only new vehicles based on the MEB platform to be unveiled this week, because another subsidiary of Volkswagen, Seat, unveiled their new all-electric CUPRA, a direct competitor of the ID.3 that will coincidentally also be built at the Zwickau plant where Volkswagen produces the ID.3. It has the same 82 kilowatt-hour battery, 510 kilometers of range, meaning it's likely a rear-wheel drive only, and for some reason they don't list it as list a 0 to 100 kilometers or 0 to 60 acceleration time. Only a 0 to 50 kilometer or a 0 to 31 mile acceleration, which is 2.9 seconds. I'm not sure if I've ever seen this kind of move in a press release before, but it does stress out something very important: instant acceleration. Because even a cheaper EV that will take a while to get to highway speeds will still really jump forward in the first 2 seconds or so when you press the pedal. For a vehicle like this, if you try to get to highway speeds, an internal combustion engine vehicle might be able to catch up. But going just from 0 to 50 or 0 to 31 kilometers an hour, the EV has the decided advantage. And I think that is what Seat here is trying to point out. In reality, I think that the vehicle will probably have a general acceleration to 100 kilometers or 60 miles an hour approximately in the same 7 seconds that it will take the Volkswagen ID.3. You see, the Volkswagen e-Up, which is closer to a Smart than a sedan with very weak motors, gets to 50 kilometers per hour in 3.9 seconds. The regular Volkswagen Up accelerates from 0 to 60 in 13.8 seconds. 0 to 50 time, unknown. But the Volkswagen Up GTI, so the performance version of the Up, gets from 0 to 60 in 8.7 seconds, accelerates from 0 to 31 in 3.5 seconds. The new electric Seat CUPRA goes from 0 to 31 in 2.9 seconds, and likely gets from 0 to 60 in the same 7 seconds like the ID.3. So I'm going to reiterate what I already said earlier. The MEB platform, it's great for cheaper vehicles to make electric vehicles more available for everyone and just bring the price down, but not as much for more expensive vehicles like Audi. What Volkswagen really needs is an MEB platform version 2 with more powerful motors that can truly compete with the Tesla Model 3 and Tesla Model Y. But I guess that's still a while off. Now, I already mentioned that the new electric Seat CUPRA is a cousin of the Volkswagen ID.3, but I hope that this comparison will really show it to you. So the user interface is different, and Seat moved the emergency button off of this bulky tablet. Really, I don't know what else to call that thing. The screen behind the wheel, however, is practically identical, as are the headlight controls on the left side of it. The steering wheel is a bit different. The layout of the buttons is slightly different, has 2 extra buttons, but all in all, it's still the same vehicle. Now, I'm curious, what do you think? Which of these looks better? Let's say they were the exact same price. Which looks better on the inside and which looks better on the outside? Let us know in the comments below. It could be an interesting discussion. Now, one thing worth noting about the 2 interiors, without knowing what you're looking for, it may be pretty hard to tell because technology has gotten really good nowadays. But the Seat interior is not a real image, but computer generated. Astoundingly good work though, some of the best I've ever seen. But when you zoom in closely on certain spots, the light is just a bit too perfect. The shadow quality is a bit imperfect, and a few reflections are not exactly like they would be in a real image. I just happen to know where to look for such stuff. Volkswagen ID.4 Factory. Volkswagen produces their ID.3 at the Zwickau plant. But now the company has started transforming the Emden plant that will start the production of the ID.4 crossover in 2022. An interesting point being made in a press release is that the Emden plant already for a long time has been making the Passat GTE, an electric car, and that people were transferred from there to the Emden plant to help start with the ID.3 production because they already have experience with making EVs. And now that the ID.3 production is up and running, these same people are going to be transferred back to Emden to help start the ID.4 production because now they have experience not just with the Passat GTE, but also with the new ID.3. It's pretty interesting. In general, this represents $1 billion worth of investment. It's the next step in Volkswagen's electrification plan. This investment should allow the plant to create 300,000 new electric vehicles every single year. Another thing that's pretty interesting what they mentioned in their press release, although in slightly other words, is the fact that within the next 13 years, they're going to be announcing 18 more electric vehicles, or in other words, 1 to 2 new EVs every single year are going to be unveiled. Unless they plan to unveil them in bulk, but that's a lot less likely. Mercedes' new S-Class PHEV. Mercedes-Benz this week teased their new upcoming S-Class plug-in hybrid electric vehicle with a very impressive electric range of 100 kilometers or 62 miles. That is thanks to its new battery that is somewhere approximately 30 kilowatt hour. That is because we assume that it has the same battery as its cousin, the GLE 350DE, with a battery of 31.2 kilowatt hours that gets a range of 99 kilometers or 61 miles. Very close. The vehicle also has a new augmented reality heads-up display, though unlike the ridiculous video Volkswagen put out, this one is actually a lot more realistic. Mercedes already does pretty much the same thing through a camera on the screen with the current MBUX enabled vehicles. Though that is a lot more distracting since you kind of need to look down onto the center console screen in order to see this. Here, it's in front of you right on top of the road. And I'm actually pretty interested how they're going to implement the head or eye tracking that you kind of need to make this technology work. I mean, it's possible that because this is still a fairly small standard heads-up display that they won't need it yet, but kind of head tracking is definitely required if they want to scale this up, and there's a good chance they might include some technology like that here as well. The exterior of the vehicle is still camouflaged. It seems they want to unveil this vehicle bit by bit. News at Lightspeed. Welcome to a new segment of the news show that we're calling News at Lightspeed. This is something I've been meaning to implement for a while because every week there are usually a couple of stories that are definitely worth mentioning, but are just so short that they can be covered in like a sentence or 2 or 3. And, just devoting an entire section to it, seemed a bit much. So I thought, let's put them all into one segment. And this week we have 4 other climate change stories and 3 other electric vehicle stories that are going to be very, very short. So let's give this a try. It has now been calculated that even if we stop emitting right now, it'll take another 30 years until we start to see a slowdown in temperature increase and start seeing any kind of decrease in CO2 levels. I mean, there were some people that thought that the few short months of COVID will already make a difference in the long run. Well, that's obviously not the case. And we already knew that really, but now it's nice to have a number in mind to truly understand and show people what it's going to take to just actually start making a difference. Right now, with the CO2 levels above 400 parts per million, we are basically at levels that haven't been seen for the past 3 million years. However, some new calculations show that by the year 2025, even if with reductions in emissions, we will actually be at a level of CO2 that we haven't seen for the past 15 million years, where at a time where hominids have basically only just split off from the orangutan. On the permafrost of Alaska, the beaver population is increasing and moving further north than they've ever been seen before. And the new dams that they are building basically divert more rivers into places they've never been before, in turn melting a lot more permafrost. So yeah, beavers are now accelerating climate change as well and, worsening the permafrost problem. A glacier in Italy is turning pink. Now, if you remember a news story from a few months ago, how in Antarctica snow is turning red because of algae. Well, this is its pink-colored cousin. In general, watermelon snow, what this effect is called, is not new for this particular glacier, but the fact that there was so little snowfall and higher atmospheric temperatures have really made it an ideal environment for the algae to thrive. Which is obviously really bad for the glacier because then it is less reflective, it melts more. Like I said, in general, it's bad for climate change. Fun bonus fact, however, in Switzerland, there is an algae on a glacier that actually makes it more purple rather than pink or red. Also, just fun fact. There are also 3 very quick EV stories. The Lucid Air will be the most aerodynamic production vehicle ever with a drag coefficient of 0.21, where the Model 3 has a drag coefficient of 0.23 and the Model S has a drag coefficient of 0.24. For reference, most vehicles have a drag coefficient between 0.3 and 0.4. However, in 2013, Mercedes with the CLA Blue Efficiency, and in 2017, BMW with their 5 Series Efficient Dynamics Edition did have a drag coefficient of 0.22. And the new Porsche Taycan 2020 has a drag coefficient of 0.22. But those are so expensive, and 2 of the 3 are special editions. There's no way that you can compare that to the massive sales numbers of the Model 3. However, what Lucid Motors has now done with this drag coefficient of 0.21 is absolutely unprecedented. And fun fact, that is exactly the goal that Elon Musk originally had for the Model 3. Well, they didn't exactly meet that, but, fun to know. Tesla has started taking Cybertruck reservations in China, just testing the water, so to speak, to see how much demand there is for it there. Right now, in general, pickup trucks are not legal in the metropolitan city area of Chinese cities. However, that is a law that is rumored to be changing sometime soon. But whether that's true or not, I guess we'll see. Tesla is seriously ramping production at Gigafactory 3 in Shanghai, much more than anyone was expecting. In fact, it's ramping so much that LG Chem, who now makes the 2170 cells for all the vehicles built there, now has to adapt one of their plants in South Korea to also make these cells because they just cannot seem to keep up with demand. So that was it for the Lightspeed stories. What do you guys think? Useful or not? Let us know in the comments down below, because that was it for this week's news show. Although there's one more thing before we end. Tesla has announced that their end of the quarter investor call will be taking place on July 22nd, and we'll be having our usual live stream on that date. We'll be publishing an article on CleanTechnica.com with the video in it where you can set yourself a notification when we go live. Or next to the subscribe button on this video, there is a bell icon. And if you press that, you will also be notified when we release a new video or if we go live. So that will accomplish the exact same thing. We hope you guys liked this week's video. And if you did, please give this video a thumbs up and consider sharing it with your friends that also care about clean tech. Most of the things that we cover in the news show, we also write articles about, and quite often in much greater detail to a much greater extent than we can cover in the news show. Links to those are in the first comment down below. Other than that, I wish you guys a great weekend. Till next time. See ya.